How much resilience does Tom Mitchell and his body have left after we have now found out that another foot injury has arisen? And it can be all intertwined. Last year it was plantar fascia, he gets that removed, and now a scan has identified some bone stress in his second metatarsal. And I can tell you from my own experience having surgery on my second metatarsal, they're nasty, niggly, and difficult to work with. So what we're going to do here is we're going to hypothesize that if Tom Mitchell is to play 10 games or less next year, which could be the case, realistically, these foot injuries don't disappear and they flare up as they please. They're pricks to deal with, unfortunately. I actually think the mold of our midfield will evolve and change forever. The reason I say that is with the cattle we have at the moment and the limited draft stock, barring an acquisition that we'll talk about in a moment that we could get, I don't think our ability or our willingness to rely on a contested bull, like an out-and-out contested bull like Tom Mitchell, is going to be the way to go moving forward with the availability in the team. I think we'll genuinely find a healthy spread of contested possessions across the makeup of our midfield moving forward. And it's not from players like Ned Long, Finlay McRae, or Lockie Sullivan yet. I feel like they need to raise their game by at least 20% in different sort of domains for them each. Finlay McRae, we know he needs to work on his disposal coming out of the contest and breaking out of those packs. Lockie Sullivan, we need to see if he has that composure for AFL level with the decision making. And Ned Long is more to do with his distribution and his kicking, general field kicking all across the ground. So those players are more the fringe players as it stands. There are two alternatives to Tom Mitchell or replacements for the longer term. And we'll start with one of our own, Ed Allen. We saw in the game against Melbourne at the end of the year that Ed Allen could do it on both ends, inside and outside, when it came to his ball winning ability. He killed it in the contest and was able to impact on the outside as well. And maybe that comes from playing a lot of wing time in the VFL and then also rotating into the midfield later in the season, which is what granted him an opportunity to play on ball against Melbourne late in that year. So if we can get something like a low 40s when it comes to contested possession rate, so 40%, 42%, hypothetically 42% contested possessions, and then something like 58% uncontested possessions in that low realm, that is a healthy balance and probably suggests that you are an inside-outside midfielder. For reference, Nick Dacos had 46% of his possessions coming under the contested possession stat, but that was by necessity. He was the hit-to guy in a lot of the ruck contests, which made him more of a contested on-ball player because we just didn't have anybody to fulfill that role in the meanwhile. So ideally, you probably want Nick Dacos closer to the 40% range so we can see his true kicking ability across the ground. We didn't get to see that as much as we did in the formative years. I know Dacos is still in his formative years at AFL level, but the first 2 years in 22 and 23, we really got to see the way he's able to swiftly move the ball. In 2024, we were able to see Nick Dacos become an absolute contested machine and hitting the scoreboard at times. And then if you want to look at your ultimate contested beasts of the league, Matt Rowell has a ridiculous split in a 60-40, 60% contested, 40% uncontested, and then Cripps as well, 56% of his possessions come from the contest, we'll say. The other alternative is an acquisition, and it's not Dan Houston. We know where Dan Houston should reside for the most part of his career at Collingwood, but we're talking about Harry Perryman. I've seen some match simulation when going down to training to watch Collingwood, and he has been playing in the midfield. Obviously, when there are limited numbers, you are not going to play. You're not going to have much midfield depth in those match simulations. So players who would roll through the midfield would typically start in the midfield in this match simulation because of the limited numbers. But nevertheless, Perriman looked good. And he's another player who he's got contested ability and he's really good on the outside. So he's another player who could be found in the low 40 percentile when it comes to contested possession rate, which would then help the spread. That's what I'm saying. So not necessarily having someone who averages over 50% of their possessions to be contested. I'm saying if we can spread it evenly across De Goey, across Pendlebury, across Nick Dacos, Ed Allen, Harry Perryman, the need for someone like Tom Mitchell becomes lessened. And I said earlier, well, what's the other hypothetical if we do pick up another big fish in the market? We're talking about Matt Rowell, of course. He will plug that problem for the next 10 years for Collingwood, but it's time to wonder, why don't we just go this other way and see if we can share the load in the contested domain and have this fair split between all these players, and then we don't have to worry about having this player who we rely on a week-to-week basis, and if they're injured, well, then we're cooked. So that's my food for thought when it comes to that. And ladies and gentlemen, this is why it's critical that Ed Allen takes his game to the next level next year. That's why it's important that we see Harry Perryman. Hey, he wants to come to Collingwood and get more midfield opportunity. That's why he's left GWS. Will show us that you can do what we need moving forward. If you ask me, who would you prefer out of the two? In the long term, clearly it's Ed Allen. His X factor, or he has X factor in the fact that he is a 6'4" monster in the midfield and is an inside-out player. So for mine, Ed Allen. But if he's not ready next year, that's fine. Give him another year to work his way into things, and then Harry Perryman can play a role in the meanwhile. For those who are wondering, Tom McGuan isn't going to be that guy, that contested bull. Watching a lot of his Coates Talent League in 2024, he played a lot on ball, especially as the season wore on, but he wasn't the go-to guy in the ruck contest. He was that player who gets the ball fed out to him from the contest and then is a real connector up and down the field, pretty much just roams through the corridor and connects and finds a way to hit the scoreboard as well. So a similar size to Sullivan. He's 177 centimeters, so he's not big-bodied, and you get smaller players who are absolute machines in the contest like Caleb Sarong, but McGuan's not going to be that guy. He's going to be more of an outside player in his AFL career, unless we see something different in his draft year next year, but we'll see. What do you guys think in the comment section? Would you prefer to remold the midfield and share the load when it comes to the contested possession realm, or do you still think it's critical that we have an out-and-out contested machine in the midfield at all times, especially in the final series? Go Pies.